So at 7:01, call the meeting to order. Happy New Year. Glad to see everyone. Welcome. Hope that your holidays were good. Hope that you didn't have to do too much shoveling. This morning there was obviously a little bit, and we do have a bylaw that talks about shoveling and ice removal and all that. There was a little bit of discussion of that in some of the social media postings and so forth about lack of compliance with that and enforcement and things along those lines. If you hear anything about that in the community, we can certainly bring it back for discussion, review, and possible changes if appropriate. So just want to mention that as we're opening. So with that, Catherine is doing the dutiful job of taking minutes for this evening. So we've got a couple of members of the public. If you wish, you are welcome to speak in the next part of this, which is public engagement, or as usual, you're welcome to speak during the meeting. I anticipate that tonight's meeting will be on the shorter side. Anyone wish to speak during the public engagement? Okay, moving along. Minutes from December 18th. I actually didn't get those minutes available, so we will need to defer that to the next meeting itself, but put them on the agenda hoping that those would come in. They didn't, so we'll defer those to the next meeting. And we'll also have the minutes from this meeting because Catherine is dutifully taking them. So with that, reviewing the zoning bylaws, you may notice that we have Attorney Mullen joining us this evening, and Attorney Bobrowski is not. He is out, I think, searching out penguins in the wonders of Antarctica, as he told us last time. So he is in a rather icy place, different than Wakefield and Concord and other places that he's familiar with. And so he's in a physically icy place. And Attorney Mullen has agreed to join us. What the goal is for today is to do a first overview of the consolidated draft that Attorney Bobrowski sent before he went on his trip. He'll be joining us next week. He's due to come back at the end of this week. So, but we do actually have a consolidated draft, our very first draft of the consolidated bylaws. There are some sections that that Attorney Bobrowski has said that he's still working on. In particular, the sign overlay bylaw he wants to renumber, but he plans to largely leave that as is due to the complexity of that. That was the information that he told me up front as we were planning for this meeting. And welcome, Lucy. So Catherine, if you can note that Lucy joined us at 7:04. So the goal behind this really is to go over the first version of the consolidated draft. Quickly, I anticipate we're not going to go into a huge amount of detail this evening because we will be having a meeting with Attorney Bobrowski next week. But this also provides a good opportunity for Attorney Mullen to see where this is in the current state of the updates. Some communities have gone through only a handful of drafts, others have done dozens. So we will go through as much detail as we need to for the various pieces here. Just want to state that up front. So we don't have any sort of mandate or limitation on the number of components in the actual draft, nor any limitations to it either. And then after that, for the other item on the agenda itself is a discussion of the proposed MBTA Communities Overlay District bylaw. I did just receive a copy of the current proposed warrant article. I will put that into Dropbox and have that posted. It's the same thing that was presented to the town council. So if you search that out, the purpose of this is to really schedule another meeting. So I know that Aaron Kokinda, who is the town's business development officer, wants to join us for that piece, so we can try to schedule a meeting to discuss it. So any questions before we get started on a quick review of the initial draft? And again, if there's any big questions, we will likely have the ability to defer those. Tom, feel free to defer anything you want to Attorney Bobrowski because, well, he's on the hook for all of it. You get to be on the hook once it gets approved by town meeting and it gets presented. Any questions? Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead. And share the zoning. Everyone should be able to see my screen reasonably well. I'm trying to keep the size of it reasonably small, so regardless of what your device is, you'll be able to see it. Okay, so this is draft number 1. The expectation is that there will be additional drafts as well. This one was prepared obviously at the end of next year. As noted in here, new text is yellow, and then there's strikeouts, and old text is just general black. So there's a variety of different codifications that are being done here. This is really for us to review, and this will also be presented, I think in this way is the intent to present to town meeting when there are questions on individual items so that it can come up to see the differences between old sections of the bylaw versus new sections. As part of the reorganization, the purpose itself is is this wording and so forth, and the purpose is really very new. And as Attorney Bobrowski put it, this is to make sure that this bylaw, as far as zoning, is limited in its state to be for zoning and to allow for the various components of zoning itself. It also allows for things to be either approved or denied as the town sees appropriate. If there's other things that we want to add to the purpose of zoning, we certainly can. So part of this includes orderly growth of the town. I do want to point out that as part of this, and this may be something that will come out at town meeting as well, is that the word growth is in here, which does imply that there is an expectation of increased population over time. So that is an expectation that is consistent with the idea behind the MBTA communities overlay as well. So also, and this I think will also address some of the political concerns with growth, is to prevent blight. There's an environmental aspect to this that's significant. Encouraging appropriate use of land throughout the town. This is an area that in reality I expect is subject to individual perspectives. If anyone has other ways of presenting that and considering it, please by all means speak up, because this is an area, again, when this gets presented to the town at town meeting, this is central and core to why are we doing zoning in the first place. There may be some who don't recognize climate change, but to mitigate and reverse the effects of climate change, to encourage multimodal transportation, we may want to consider the wording on that given the most recent discussions, but I don't have a problem with the language itself being in here. Any thoughts on that? Protect public health, protect public health and safety.
Why, can I just ask why to mitigate and reverse the effects of climate change and to encourage multimodal transportation is on the same line? Would those be separate, like just following this format?
It's a great question. I don't know why they are together.
It may also be inconsequential, but just something.
Something we can certainly bring up to Attorney Bobrowski. Seems appropriate. to potentially break those out as separate bullets. To embrace and encourage racial, cultural, generational, and socioeconomic diversity. Tom, as I'm going through this, is there anything else from a legal perspective that should be listed here to make sure that we have necessary protections and we're not deemed to be discriminatory that you can think of?
I'm not, I don't think I've ever seen a zoning code that included a statement of purpose like this, that to embrace and encourage racial, cultural, generational, and socioeconomic diversity. I mean, an admirable goal, I suppose, but not one that I generally associate with zoning. And I guess my approach to any statement of purpose or interests to be protected is to err on the side of minimalism, because when you increase the number of interests to be protected by the bylaw, what you do is you give standing to people who want to contest our zoning decisions and who base their standing on one of these interests. Yeah, I don't feel all that strongly about it, but for that reason, I generally want to a statement of purposes or protected interests to be short and simple.
Is it helpful to look at what was deleted and that this is replacing? The struck through text in below?
Yeah, can we see that, Dan?
Sure. So this is what it's replacing. 193 and 19069.
Yeah, and Dan, if I may chime in, just looking at my notes from when Mark talked about this, I think Mark's only concern was the preserve the value of property. And then it sounded like he was just gonna provide some options. I think he said a sushi menu. So I think the items above are kind of the sushi menu. But the existing wording, he really didn't have an issue with, except for the protect and conserve the value of property.
That is also my recollection. So given that, are there items in here that we think are inappropriate to put into a purpose?
Personally, I would rather keep the existing wording and take out the part that Mark was concerned about around the value of property. I think when we rewrite it, it could potentially, get political as to what statements we put in here. And I could see that potentially, causing some discussion. And I would personally say we stick with as close to the expiring as possible.
Because some things are a little bit, some things are significantly different and updated, such as the old version talks about specifically dangers from fires and hazards of floodwater inundation. So he's trying to change that in some of the different alternate language.
Yeah, and I like the new language, and I think maybe framing it as like standard language that is updated all at the same time in a way that the replaced or the struck through language is probably was like added to, I don't know, could have been added to. I just personally like the updated language. I think it sounds more contemporary and aligned with Um. I mean, like my values, I guess.
Other
So I don't
opinions
know
and
if
thoughts?
like, yeah, I don't know if like framing it as like, well, this is standard language that is more consistently used when people are rewriting zoning laws now in 2024, maybe that would be a helpful way to introduce a change to this or to frame out that change that wouldn't feel like as disruptive as like, oh, we're just replacing it with all new text.
Okay. That's a good point. Welcome, Eric. Other thoughts for those of you who are joining us? Brian, Theo, if you've got thoughts on this as well. Because obviously this gets to the heart of planning and the heart of representing, clients and so forth, as to what would be allowed, what the purpose of the zoning itself is, the purpose of the land use.
I would say, to add on to what Lucy was saying, a lot of this really does dovetail with Vision 2030 and the results of the master plan that are so. I can't. Well, I would just say that I think there's a lot of things in concert. So I think Tom does make a good point about short and sweet. But I think I think this looks pretty good. So
Thank you. Brian, anything to add? Anything here that would give you pause?
Mainly just the social aspect of it, the one that Tom pointed out, the cultural, generational, racial, socioeconomic diversity. I don't think that's appropriate for zoning, and I think it might be problematic. Could even be problematic with the Attorney General, Tom, if they look at it, because it's really goes against it. I mean, different people can define that differently, and I just don't think it's appropriate in a zoning bylaw.
Which part?
The line item says to embrace and encourage racial, cultural, and generational and social economic diversity. That has nothing to do with land use.
Can you scroll down and so I can just see all everything that was deleted? Thank you.
I think that's replacing encouraging housing for all income and age levels, and he expanded on it a little bit.
And the one cultural and economic welfare of the public.
Yeah.
I think if you reword it something like that, it might be more appropriate. That's just my thought. But
I like the language that is proposed, and I think that that is something that we can do with zoning. So I would recommend to, or my opinion is to keep it.
Bob, welcome to the meeting. Glad to have you. And I can see you've got your hand up.
I would like to encourage keeping that sentence in about the racial, culture, generation, and so on. If the Attorney General doesn't like it, let him delete it. It's not an essential component like taking away the foundation of a building. So I'll leave it in, I would say. I affirm that.
Thank you. Bob, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I looked at the vision statement that's part of the master plan, and the word that it has, the words it has in there that's kind of similar to what you're discussing is welcomes and supports residents in different life stages and is inviting to people of all backgrounds. That's the closest of the vision statement to the language you have in there. And I don't know whether you want to maybe adopt language more in tune with what the vision statement says, or to keep it in the current 190-3 purpose section dealing with educational, cultural, and economic welfare of the public. But I kind of agree with the town council and Brian McGrail that I'm not sure that that kind of language is necessary, should be placed in a zoning bylaw.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for the feedback. So this is one that we will definitely be revisiting. I will let Attorney Bobrowski know that this is in one of the items that definitely will need further discussion and possible refinement. It may be re-wordsmithing it, maybe striking it, maybe changing it, possibly reverting it, or some combination thereof. But lots of really good opinions on this. Authorities reworded. Scope. The scope appears to be overall new in the way that this works. And I think the purpose of this is to explicitly allow for zoning to handle all the elements of this scope. What I don't know, Tom, you may have an idea on this, is if the scope is specified in this way, does it limit it to only the scope, which would mean that we're not able to discuss things that aren't listed in here, which would be things such as light pollution and the auxiliary components, things that are issues next to the land and so forth, that since they're not listed in the scope itself.
Well, it doesn't purport to be exclusive.
And I just want to make sure that it would be defensible if in a finding by the zoning board of appeals where there are changes to, say, light pollution or other mitigating issues for a proposed project that would then live on with that structure, that would not be limited to this scope. That's something that you could pretty easily take to court if necessary.
Yeah, I think so.
Others, questions, concerns on scope?
Yes.
Brian?
Me? Oh,
Oh, Eric, I'll defer to Eric. He's on the board. Please.
I remember a case 4 decades ago about the question of light pollution going into the building next door. And the zoning board of appeals kind of restricted their use of external lighting. That particular parcel of land is the one from the Main Street to Wakefield between Sabatino's and the church. But light pollution was going from Sabatino's to the hardware store before then into the church was a concern mentioned in the zoning board of appeals decision granting the extension to the building. In other words, a practical case in the past.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. McGrail.
Yeah, can you just scroll up a little bit? Please? A little bit more. A little more purpose. So we've deleted purpose and intent completely, which,
Well, it
is-
was replaced.
yeah, okay. So now go back down. I guess what I'm wondering is, and I defer to Tom on this, I don't know the answer. I'm just gonna raise a question. Is there really a need to have scope? What's the purpose of it?
Yeah, I was just thinking that myself. We don't really need it because the scope is provided by chapter 40A.
Just confuses things.
Yeah.
You've got your purpose of the bylaw, and then the bylaw speaks for itself. You don't need to say what the scope of it is. It is the bylaw when you go through it. Just redundant and confuses things.
Do you want to say that again?
I think it's just redundant and it confuses things.
That was redundant.
Well, one and the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, bad humor. Theo caught it. Okay. Applicability.
There were more people laughing. I was slow to catch on.
So the applicability. The way that this is a new adaptation, because this is replacing the entire adoption and amendment section, but the applicability section seems to be a limiting element here, so that it basically means that this isn't fully enforceable. That's my interpretation of the way that it's worded. Tom, is that a fair assessment? I could be very wrong in this.
Well, one thing that's crucial here is the second sentence. No building, structure, or land shall be used for any purpose or in any manner other than is expressly permitted within the district in which such building, structure, or land is located. That's crucial because we want to have the kind of zoning bylaw that's construed to mean if it's not expressly allowed, it's forbidden. The alternative is that things could be allowed without being expressly considered by town meeting, and we want to avoid that. So, at least with respect to that sentence, I think it's very good.
Other thoughts? The amendment section, the entirety of 19070 was reduced to one sentence. In terms of brevity, I like it. It's short.
Well, also, Dan, it's useful because chapter 48, section 5 has been changed so dramatically, and our bylaw hadn't kept up with it. I mean, our bylaws said what had been true in years past, which is you needed a 2/3 vote. And now it's always a struggle to figure out in advance of town meeting what zoning bylaw amendments require a 2/3 vote and which don't. Just to take one example of a major change.
So among the changes that are happening here is there was specific instructions on how individuals and groups could request a change. Is that addressed in chapter 48, section 5?
Yes.
Any questions on this? And this also allows, I believe one of the changes is that some components can now be done with majority vote instead of requiring 2/3. Is that correct?
That's the point I just made, yeah.
Yep. But to adopt this change will still require 2/3 under the existing bylaw.
Yes. Well, require 2/3 under state law.
Okay. Mr. McGrail,
For you, Mr. Chair, the town council, and I don't know the answer, so I'm gonna ask, is there any need, Tom, to reference our charter here or not? Probably not.
I don't think so.
I didn't either, but
The charter takes precedence over the bylaw no matter what. And 40A takes precedence over it also.
okay.
it's certainly much simpler, and as state law changes, this will automatically keep up with it. Severability, fairly standard severability language, again, simpler. In 1.8, keeping that language as it currently exists, it'll be, the effective date will be as it's adopted by town meeting. In practice, it won't actually be effective immediately. It still has to go through review by the Attorney General, and that can take a few months. But then it gets made effective retroactively. Where there may be some confusion is that people who have anything that's incongruous, but is my understanding is that anyone who has a use or otherwise that's consistent and incongruous between the current zoning bylaw that's in effect today and any changes here they will be able to use whichever bylaw is more advantageous for them at that point. So they will be able to effectively be grandfathered in as long as that use continues. Is that a correct interpretation? If there is a substantive differentiation between this set of zoning bylaws and the current uses?
Well, any use that was lawfully commenced prior to a change in allowable uses may be maintained as a non-conforming use. Sure.
So the fees and submission requirements are being removed in their entirety. And the primary purpose of that is that will be deferred to the boards to be done by regulation. So that way, no fee changes don't have to go through a majority or 2/3 vote at town meeting, which is a very time-consuming process. Mr. McGrail.
Just a note on that, historically, and I don't, this is just for information purposes. I really don't care, but, and I remember Mark talked about that it shouldn't be in the bylaw, but that's always been in our bylaw. And it's been a contentious and robust debate at town meeting when fees have been tried to be increased. And it's been brought to town meeting to increase them, and it's been defeated before. So I just think some of the town meeting members might have an issue with that power being taken away from the town meeting body and put at an administrative level. Just a thought, but again, I really don't care either way personally. I think it was about 6 years ago that they tried to raise the fees and it was defeated at town meeting.
Yeah, Dan, I personally would like to keep them in here just so so fees are clear to an applicant. I personally would like them in here, but I'm not gonna, I'll defer to the overall committee.
So perhaps it can be that the schedule is kept out, but changes to fees have to be approved by town meeting. So I'm not sure if there's a way to do that, Tom, so that if there's a replacement of the fee schedule, we don't have to have the full list of all of the fees within the bylaw itself. But if there is going to be a change, it may just be an increase that it requires going to town meeting. It could be that a decrease does not.
Well, I've never seen anything like that. I don't know that it would be illegal to say that. I guess I think it would be unnecessary. If you're going to have town meeting argue about the amount of the fees, then why not put it in the bylaw? And somebody made the valid point that there is some transparency that's accomplished by putting it in the bylaw. People will presumably look at that more readily than they'll look at ZBA regulations, which incidentally aren't even in, I don't think they're in our general code publication, though they ought to be. I'm okay with either doing what's been done here, which is take out all this junk and allow the ZBA to do by regulation that which they can do, which includes setting fees, or putting the fees in particular in here and leaving out all the rest of this junk, like how many copies you file. That's kind of ridiculous to get bogged down in a bylaw about that.
Thoughts on that, keeping the fees and getting rid of the other elements?
I personally think it's beneficial to give ZBA some authority on the fee schedule. I think costs go up, inflation affects things, and I think giving them the ability to set these fees at appropriate levels is appropriate. So I'm comfortable taking it out.
You mentioned that it has to go to the public to change the fees. Isn't that what was just said earlier? To raise them, so we can't raise them anyways, can we? The ZBA?
My understanding is if it's pulled out and then it becomes by regulation, then the ZBA would have the authority to then change them as they deem appropriate. Tom, is that an accurate representation?
Yes.
So it's somewhat binary. Either we keep the fees in a bylaw, which then requires town meeting to change them, or we keep the fees external. But what Tom has mentioned here is that we could separate the fees from the rest of the submission process. So the submission process could be handled by regulation, but the fees themselves would then be in the bylaw.
I mean, I could see this, I could be on both sides of this, but that just, I mean, I don't want to complain, but that just gives us at the ZBA one more thing to do when we could just go back and say, hey, that's in the bylaw, pay these fees. We kept them. But if we take them out, and then we have to, we have to, I'm not trying to give us less work to do, but I feel like now we have to apply these fees. If I'm thinking about that correct.
And there is a political statement there that I'm hearing is non-recurrent that's certainly significant. Because we're talking about the costs that get borne by the person who's requesting service.
Right.
So one question that does come up is if the fees are explicitly listed, would that preclude there from being any new fees from being added, as opposed to as different types of structures, different uses, and other items that might require different types of inspectional services with costs come up? If we keep the fees in the bylaw itself. Tom, you may have an answer to that, an opinion on that.
Well, I don't think there'd be any legal prohibition against including different new fees in regulations as opposed to the bylaw. I guess just as a matter of practice, though, you'd think it makes sense to do one or the other, but not both.
Agreed, and that's part of the reason why I'm asking is I can see there being based upon our prior discussions, envision there possibly being a fee if there's going to be a structure that's used for short-term rentals. There might be a fee for different types of inspections that are required. And that's not something we currently have, but could be something that would potentially be added. And so it's a matter of, if we're not going to allow that except through town meeting, then there could be a period of time where people could, make those applications while it's being considered by town meeting, which I don't have a problem with. To your point, it keeps it simpler. Counselor Vincent.
Yeah, Dan, refresh my memory, but when we served on the bylaws review committee, the last iteration, and we were dealing with non-zoning bylaws, we kept those fees in the bylaws. So if those fees change, that has to go to town meeting. One is like your dog license fee, 104.13, where it's $10, $5, $100, things like that. We kept that in there so that those changes have to be made at town meeting. So for consistency purposes, we could keep those fees in 190.73. Is that what it is? 190.73, which only covers a half a page, by the way, and all the rest of the how many documents you have to produce for the ZBA, that all can be eliminated. But if we want to be consistent with the non-zoning section of the town bylaws, I would say we should keep the fees in 190.73 or whatever the number is going to be now.
Yeah, but
Okay.
Dan, isn't this like, I see what Vincent's saying, but like, and then he mentioned how many copies, and I was thinking to myself, we should keep that in there, because if someone in the public just goes online and looks at this, they already know what they're getting into. For me, if I'm just a homeowner, I'm looking up to maybe get a variance or doing it myself, I can go online and see what I'm up against. Well, I need these fees, I need this many copies, I got to mail all this stuff to my neighbors. If it's not in there, then now they're going down to town hall and bothering Gail. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it right now. If it's up there online and in the book, not to repeat myself, but they can just kind of see what they're up against.
Okay.
Can I just chime in about the number of copies and stuff like that?
Sure.
The planning board's really found that to be sort of stale and outdated, and at least from our end of things. And what we really just want PDFs of stuff, that's accessible and things like that. I don't know. Joe makes a good point. You want like one location to get all the information, but there's a reason why each of our boards have our own rules and regulations, because you do have to go a little bit deeper than you can within this document.
So the idea of keeping the fees, but the process, making that by regulation.
Yeah, that would I think free us up to be a little more nimble.
Excellent comments. Thank you, Mr. McGrail.
Yeah, great point by Theo. It is antiquated. I mean, you should see the paper that I bring in for some projects. It's ridiculous. It's a waste. It's a waste of paper. It's a waste of money. I'd rather see the fees increase to apply and give the money to the town and the printing company. It's also very cumbersome for town officials and the building department and in various departments to have to move these plans around when in today's world they're submitted by PDF. They can just be emailed very easily. So that's a really good comment. The other thing is that this really needs a scrubbing, because Mark did in other sections of the bylaw that is this draft is proposed, certain number of days and certain number of copies. And sometimes it varies of what you're applying for. So I think we just need to like really scrub this on the next version and kind of tie it in a bow and make it uniform throughout. It needs some work.
Agreed. And that's part of the reason for going through this.
Yeah,
And,
I agree. I agree.
And the idea of splitting the fees from the process, I think, is very helpful. Theo, did you have another comment?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So the good news is we've gotten through subsection 1.0 in the first draft. That perfectly fine. Great comments. Just want to start on section 2, and then we're going to shift gears over to the proposed MBTA communities. Also would like to just recognize Aaron Kukinda, who is from working with town, who's joined us as well. If you've got any thoughts on any of this, you are welcome to chime in, because obviously a lot of this does affect the business development and so forth. So if you've got thoughts on what would make this a stronger community, please by all means chime in.
Thank you so much. I definitely will. Thank you.
So section 2 is on the districts themselves. There are some recommended changes to some of the district names in here. The overall districts are being kept as is. And then there is a little bit of a change in 211. The general description is just basically stating that this is defining what is used and what isn't. I believe this gets to the point Tom was making earlier, which means this becomes very enforceable. It also removes any unzoned land because there is no unzoned land. That seemed to be a misnomer, unless there's any unzoned land that we're not aware of. Tom, are you aware of any by chance? I don't think there's been any unzoned land in Wakefield for a very long time. There's basically no unused land in Wakefield. It's all being used by something, or at least designated for something. Any questions on 211 under the general description of the districts? Mr. McRail.
Oh, I think I'm gonna be in the next section. You're gonna stay on section 2?
We're gonna go on to 212.
Oh,
That's
sorry
gonna be
about that. Yep, I'm
That's
fine.
okay. Okay, 212, amendments to the municipal district. A lot of this is going ahead and getting rid of the definitions of the actual districts themselves and just using the names. One of the other changes that was recommended was, instead of having the assisted living facility overlay district, was to, I believe that he had another name that he wanted to use that for that, which I believe was something along the lines of senior housing, so to make it a little bit more specific. But by getting rid of the definitions, it will allow it does not have the forced definitions, which could again give people standing based upon the definition of a district, as opposed to not having a definition for them to claim to. Wakefield's known for having a lot of overlay districts. We have a lot of those in here. We have the MBTA overlay district, which will be a addition here. I think we do need to figure out what the new wording is for what's currently the assisted living facility overlay. Mr. McRail.
Yeah, if I could, Mr. Chair, I think the assisted living overlay district is gonna have to get a look. Because what Mark has proposed is he calls it, as you said, senior housing. But when you look at it as proposed in this bylaw, our assisted living facility overlay district and bylaw amendment goes back to 2000, and I believe it was 2012. And you probably remember the town meetings on that, because it's what allowed Brightview to go in. And it's an extensive bylaw for assisted living. It has density requirements for assisted living. It has setback relief for assisted living. It has specific parking requirements for assisted living, because they are much more, you don't use as much as the typical residential development. And a big thing with town meeting on that was, and it's a requirement of our bylaw, is a certain mix of units, assisted living units versus independent living units. That's all in our bylaw today, and that was heavily debated at town meeting because of economic impacts of both of those. So I'm not saying I'm not advocating. I just want to raise it to your attention that that's going to have to really be looked at on how it's going to work if it gets shifted over to something else with all of those requirements. Furthermore, we have an assisted living facility overlay district map with properties, specific properties that are designated in that district. So that potentially that map would have to be amended to be changed if those areas were going to incorporate. So again, I know this is a working copy. It's very early, but I just wanted to kind of put that on your radar.
Absolutely, and much appreciated. Amongst the items the Attorney Bobrowski raised is that the assisted living overlay district, to your point, talks about assisted living, talks about independent living, but it omits some of the other current uses that are in that district and are actually being used, such as memory care and so forth. And so it's a matter of which is a different type of service. And so he wanted to make it so that it would be a bit more expansive in its use based upon the evolution of the assisted living industry. As we know, the age in the town is not getting any younger, nor are any of us on a daily basis. I'm trying to be as politically correct as I can be. And it's something that there's going to continue being a growing need. So I think the intent is to do more renaming than a wholesale replacement. So there will be additional work needed on this componentry. And some of those pieces, you're right, the map will probably need to be accepted as a part of the recodification just because of the naming and so forth with that.
Yeah, and you're gonna, like in the assisted living facility overlay 190, 103 of our current bylaw, that's where it puts all the dimensional requirements, parking requirements, density requirements, certain square feet of land per unit, because that's different than a residential because of the lesser impact, because not as many cars. So there's a lot of things that are going to have to be looked at and incorporated into that new section that currently aren't there now, the way this has been drafted. So I'm happy to work on that. I just wanted to put it on everybody's radar.
If you can help with make proposals for that, would be much appreciated.
I'd be happy to. I'm not against the concept. I just don't want something to get left behind, if you will.
Agreed. We amongst the things I think this body has been pretty consistent with is that we don't want to put anyone in the town, and that would include Brightview as being our neighbors, into a situation where they are in a place where they have to use the grandfathered uses under an old bylaw because it was inadvertently left off of the recodification when that was not the intent. So I think that is pretty consistent in where I think that's the only property that's using the bylaw in use, that's currently in use. I think we can make sure that the actual uses are included. That way, again, we don't have to worry about the grandfathered status of it, which makes things a whole lot easier for people who are looking at what's allowed, what's not. And if there are any issues going forward, it makes it much easier for, say, Attorney Mullen to make whatever arguments he needs to make.
Yeah, and we're going to have to carry some of the requirements, maybe like, for example, in the assisted living facility, the parking is 1 parking space for every 2 units plus 1 parking space per 2 employees in the maximum working shift. And then it goes on. And currently, you know, that's all within our assisted living section of our bylaw. So that those requirements, for example, are not in our parking table. So that's where we're gonna have to kind of carry stuff over and clean it up and make sure that gets incorporated. Otherwise, we're gonna have senior housing with no parking requirements with it. So, and again, I'm happy to help facilitate all that. I'll make sure you know, so your committee can make a decision on it, on how to deal with it.
Much appreciated. Any other questions or comments as we get through 2.3? What I wasn't sure about, Tom, you may have an answer, and some of the others who also work with this on a daily basis. Is 2016 the latest current zoning map that we have? Because I know that we have had other adoption since then, and I wasn't sure if the MBTA communities bylaw gets adopted, if that will replace that map.
So I think the MBTA article contemplates the adoption of an overlay map. It will not replace the entire zoning map. It's going to be a special map just for the MBTA overlay. And whether May 2nd, 2016 was the last time we redid the whole zoning map, I don't know. Brian might know.
I can chime in there. We've made some updates based at town meeting votes. I know Brian represented someone for a zoning change back in 2022. And so our most recent map says May 16th, 2022.
So we did reflect those changes on the current zoning map.
Correct. Yes, that's what's online and in I believe E-code, as well as what the building department has been using.
Okay, good.
It is, yep.
And so what was that date?
May 16th, 2022.
Okay. So you're having an impact on the meeting already.
Happy to be here.
Any other feedback, other questions going through section 2.3? We've been through 1, we've been through part of 2.3. There are a lot of pages to this. Don't look at the total page count. We're on page 8. This is going to take meetings, and that's okay. That's what this committee is about. We're going to have a really good product as we go forward. There are some sections of this that will go very quickly, some that will go slowly as we're getting through this, and then there will be updates to the drafts. As there are additional changes, those will be made available. So this is just draft 1, but all of these comments are absolutely excellent, and I will take the comments that I've noted, send those on to Attorney Bobrowski. I don't know whether he'll have time to do any updates before our next meeting next week, but he will certainly, I'm sure, want to chime in with his opinion on those items. So with that, I'd like to flip over to the other item on the agenda, which is the proposed MBTA Communities Overlay District bylaw. We have a copy. I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. So that I just got a copy of that earlier today. I'll be dropping that into the Dropbox for those who have access to it. We'll also, it's also available online, will be made available online to by the planning board for their hearings. The request that this body has received is that we try to hold a meeting the week of February 19th. That's the week of President's Day. And that would be to accommodate any potential changes that may come up based upon the first public hearing by the planning board, and or any other review that we may have of the overlay district itself. My understanding is that because it has already been referred to warrant, any changes that are of substance would possibly be out of scope for the public hearing, or would require it to go through a new public hearing process. But any changes that are really of a ministerial type of nature would be allowed and recommended. And so the goal really will be to try to keep changes that are ministerial, to give those back to the planning board. Those could potentially be adopted and proposed for town meeting. If there's a substantive change needed, that could potentially be done as an amendment at town meeting, is my understanding. Is that an accurate representation of the process and expectations?
I will say you hit it spot on. I'll let Attorney Mullen kind of speak more to that, but that's from my understanding how, us coming to you guys is more just for you guys to see what we will be bringing and what will be on the warrant. And more of, like you said, not substantial things, but more, grammatical, any small little things, I believe we could make edits to, and Tom, mistake me if I'm wrong. But yes, everything else would have to be amendments on the town floor.
Yeah, I agree.
So this is in a lot of ways the fruits of the labor that happened about a year ago, when we reviewed some bylaws, and positive results came as a result of that. The bylaws were substantially improved, and so we're being asked to review this bylaw to make sure that it's consistent. In addition, it will then need to be incorporated, provided that it's approved by a town meeting, it will then need to be incorporated into the recodified version of the bylaw itself. So it'll go through a process of review, in some senses, twice in short order. So that's the request that's before us. Any questions, comments, thoughts? And then we'll get into trying to schedule a meeting if we can, to accommodate for the request that's been brought to us.
Dan, when do you anticipate that town meeting will be asked to vote on the recodification?
My current expectation is May of 2025. There's a possibility that it could come up in November of 2024, but given the calendar and the detailed nature of changes in the pace of things, I don't think that that's realistic.
Mhm.
Possible, but I don't see that as being realistic, because once we get through something, it then has to go to the town council, then get referred back to the planning board. Planning board has to hold hearings, then it goes eventually to town meeting. So I think we're about a year out.
Dan, what are the chances it passes the first time? You think it will be a two town meeting kind of vote, or you think we're gonna get through this on one?
You're asking a political question that I don't have the comfort of answering. I can tell you that by charter, once we submit our final report, which will probably, I expect will be concurrent with the proposal of the bylaw review, zoning recodification. Once that report is accepted by the moderator, regardless of whether it's accepted by the town meeting, but once it's accepted by the moderator, our work is technically done. So if it fails at town meeting, it then is technically no longer our responsibility, unless we wish to continue forward and not actually submit the report. That will be a decision we will make closer to that time. We could also, of course, submit the report at a later town meeting as well.
All right, and another question, thoughts on, do we get this out early and let the town look at it? Or are we just gonna hit it with them that day?
Great question. For our drafts, all of them are being posted. So the draft one is actually already on the website for the bylaw review. As we get updates, it will go onto leave it up to the town administrator's office as to how they want to organize that, but they will get posted to the town website so that anyone in town who wants to participate can.
Is there any advertisement on this? Did we get it out in the paper or anything? I mean,
I anticipate as we get further along in the process, there will be more discussion and more advertising specifically for that. As we're still early in the review process, I'm not going to advocate that we encourage people who don't already have an interest in components to have extra participation there. Well, anyone is welcome to participate. It's just a matter of making sure that we can get through some of the language before we get into the different issues that people have, which those issues tend to be significant and will likely focus on very specific areas of the bylaw itself and the proposal. Just as we had a meaningful discussion about the social norms, there will be other areas that I anticipate will garner similar interest on a larger scale as more people take greater interest in this. But all of our meetings are posted, and I try to post them with sufficient knowledge. When people have indicated in practice to me that they have a particular area of interest, I try to give them notification when those issues are likely to come up.
my last question, I guess maybe for Tom, is Tom going to go through this like we're going through it today, page by page? Am I gonna have to bring my sleeping bag to this thing?
Yeah, it's a demanding process.
So you're gonna go basically page by page through this? And then you're gonna go page by page on town meeting, basically, on this and point out all the.
No, not at all. And in fact, in answer to your earlier question, Joe, how quickly is this likely to go through? I do have some experience here that may bear on that question, because I represent Linfield as well, and Linfield hired Mark Bobrowski to do this before Wakefield did. And I can tell you that Linfield did the whole recodification in, I don't know, an hour. You hand somebody a 2-page document and they can take days to tear it apart. Hand them 100 pages and they either accept it or reject it.
Yeah, they don't even want to look at it, probably. Yeah, that's what you're thinking. Okay.
Thank you for the sage wisdom and optimism as well. So I do know that when we do go before town meeting, Attorney Bobrowski will join us for that, so that as specific questions come up where this is his particular area of expertise, he will also represent the town and represent the committee as to what the recommendations are. So we will have 2 very experienced attorneys to represent what the needs are and the rationale. That said, there is likely to be opposition to change just by the nature of it is zoning changes and people will have different pieces. But I anticipate that this will be proposed as a wholesale recodification, and it's not intended to be broken apart. While Robert's rules does allow for some of that, this is a single bylaw, the level will be the level of separation will be subject to the moderator's discretion and town council. That would be you, Mr. Mullen, as to what amount would be within the four corners. I think that's a reasonable statement of my understanding of how it's going to be presented. But the intent is not to go through every change in the presentation itself. We're given 5 minutes by charter, and my intent as chair of the body itself will be to go through the process by which we made the change and possibly highlight some of the benefits that are being made, but otherwise it will not be to go through the changes in much specificity, but to allow for responses to any inquiries that may come up. So good question. Something we hopefully won't have to worry about for about 16 months. So the question that was asked of us was to schedule a meeting for the week of February 19th. The 19th itself is a federal and state holiday. That's a holiday of President's Day. So it would be another day that week, and we'll have to coordinate to make sure that we have legal representation as well. I don't know what Attorney Bobrowski's schedule will be on that week. I know typically Mondays are the hardest day for him to meet. Thursdays tend to be the easiest. So thoughts as to what people's schedule is. That happens to be for those who have kids in the schools, that happens to be the week of February break.
Any of those days is fine except for Monday and Friday, so. For me.
I know I can't, I know I'll be out that whole week, so just know that you won't be able to count on me for quorum.
You'll still be expected to do the minutes. You can get away, but you can't get away from the meeting. Sorry, Catherine. Good try. Others' thoughts? Availability?
I'm available that week.
I think from our side of things too, we're flexible.
Okay. Kevin,
That week
Lucy here.
That week looks pretty good for me.
Yeah, which week is this?
This is the week of February 19th.
Yeah, I think nothing conflicting at this point.
Okay. Eric,
Okay. I can do it.
have I missed anyone? So with the flexibility, and in the case of Catherine, inflexibility, what I'd like to do is to talk to Attorney Bobrowski, see what days he has available that week, and probably I think ideally schedule it possibly for Wednesday the 21st, or if he has 2 nights available with a backup of the 22nd, although if he has a preference between it, let it be his preference, not knowing his schedule, and we can't get in touch with him until the weekend at the earliest. So with that, it looks like we will have representation possibly from Attorney Bobrowski. Attorney Mullen, if Attorney Bobrowski isn't available, are you available? And you are always welcome to join us as well, because this is an area that you may have additional interest.
I believe so.
Okay. So I'll talk with Attorney Bobrowski, see what his availability is, and we'll let everyone know. We'll plan to again meet by Zoom. That way, weather and so forth should not be an issue for us, provided we don't get any massive storms. It is February break, so the odds of massive storm tend to increase with the idea of fun. So the more fun we're likely to have, Murphy's Law says that we are likely to get a massive snowstorm on that day. We all know that a bylaw review committee meeting is the most fun you can have, so the odds of having snow are high, as we saw earlier today. So February 21st or 22nd, 7 p.m. seems to work well. We'll schedule that. Aaron, anything else that you'd like to add? Anything you'd like us to review, focus on, or anything for that meeting?
No, I just hope you consistency purposes with all the hard work you guys have been doing. If you pick up on anything, if it can't be fixed today, it's something that could be fixed at town meeting. I gave you the most up-to-date document that was posted today in the paper. If you can attend our public hearings as well as a resident to kind of learn some more information, we'd greatly appreciate it. And if anyone has any questions, they can just reach out to me. And that's all I have.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks.
So our next meeting will be next Monday, February 5th, 7 PM. That will be with Attorney Bobrowski. We're not going to meet on February 19th due to President's Day. And then we will, next Monday, plan the meetings in March. We'll try to meet again. Typically, it's the first and third Mondays in March. We may have to make some adjustments for that. We'll have to see how that is going to happen. I have a potential conflict with March 4th, and I may find myself having to do an interesting different civic task. I've been called for federal jury duty starting on that day. So whether I have to show up or not is still unknown. Otherwise, I may have to be at a conference that day. We're still figuring things out. So we'll discuss that next week. So I think that it just has to do with karma coming back for me. Federal jury duty, for those of you who have not served it, is different than state. State is 1 day or 1 trial. Federal district court in Massachusetts, the jury duty is not 1 day. It's not 2 days. It's 3 weeks. It's 3 weeks on call, can be called at any time to serve. Typical trials 2 weeks, or grand jury is 18 months. So 18 months once a week. So it will be an interesting event. I will let everyone know at the meeting following that as to what happens, if anything. It also happens to be the week that the current federal appropriations are set to stop. So the courts are, they will continue for at least a few weeks, but it changes things politically as to how things happen. So a bunch of upcoming holidays. You may have noticed if you looked at the formal agenda, I listed a variety of holidays. We've got Groundhog Day coming up at the end of this week on February 2nd. For the purpose of redundancy and being Groundhog Day, we can say that again. So Groundhog Day is on February 2nd. Isra and Miraj, which is a Muslim holiday, starts on the evening of February 6th. We've got Lunar New Year, sometimes referred to colloquially as Chinese New Year, begins on February 10th. Lincoln's birthday, good old Abe, was on February 12th. Fun little fact, a lot of people think that Abraham Lincoln is from Illinois. That is his adopted home state. He's actually from Kentucky. And so he was a Southerner by birth, and then he wound up getting educated in Illinois and living there for much of his life until he went to Washington. Mardi Gras is on February 13th. Valentine's Day, as well as Ash Wednesday and the beginning of Lent, start on February 14th. So that February 14th is going to be an interesting day for those of you who are going out and celebrating Lent. It will be an interesting time for you. I wish you all the best. Hope you have a good time. Also happens to be, and I can say this publicly, happens to be one of my daughter's birthdays. So she will have a fun birthday on that as well. And then we've got President's Day on February 19th, followed by later that week, our meeting. Any last comments, updates?
Real quick, Dan, when do we go back to the other bylaws? Is that on hold until this is done, like a year, or are we gonna jump on those at all?
So great question. Those bylaws, as those are available, we will revisit those. I anticipate, given the current warrant, those could be brought up at the Maytown at this Maytown meeting, if Attorney Mullen has them available for us to take the necessary vote on those, or they can be deferred to this November. And I'll leave the recommendation for that up to Attorney Mullen as to knowing how long each of the likely warrants is going to be, so that we don't have a warrant that's too long in either of those meetings. So Attorney Mullen, do you have at this point any recommendation?
Oh, I don't know anything at all about the likely length of the warrants, except that at the annual town meeting, the MBTA article is likely to occupy a fair amount of mental space and time.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So that's part of where I'm thinking we may want to defer the general bylaw updates to November.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we
So-
still have other bylaws to review, don't we? We didn't go through the whole.
We've actually gone through all of the current bylaws. There are some that are still on the table. So there are some proposed bylaws. There are 3 that are actually still pending further more detailed review, and we'll need to go through those. And I anticipate that we'll go through those later this spring at a meeting. So those include things such as the vacant storefronts bylaw, which is still on the table again. We've got a potential bylaw to restrict the municipal use of rodenticides, second generation rodenticides, and there's a third one that was proposed. I'm drawing a blank as to what that one is offhand. That also need to be done, but there are also some general updates that are waiting approval as well. None of those seemed particularly pressing that need to be done this May as opposed to in November. So good questions. And those will need the guidance of Attorney Mullen. Other questions, items? With that, Catherine, are you ready to record the roll call vote of the evening? So everyone can get their hands ready to release on the to release the mute buttons. We need someone to make a motion to adjourn, and then we'll need someone to second. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, Tim has made the motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Lucy has seconded. Catherine, you've got that? So Tim has made a motion to adjourn. Lucy has seconded. Any discussion? With that, we will take a roll call vote in the order in which you appear on my screen. Catherine,
Yes.
thank you. Tim,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Lucy,
Yes.
Eric. You're on mute. If you're unable to come off of mute, Eric, if you can do a thumbs up or thumbs down, that will also suffice on the motion to adjourn, because we weren't able to hear you. I think Eric is having, there we go. Eric, your vote for motion to adjourn?
Dan, I can't hear you over the library vacuum.
Okay, motion to
Oh.
adjourn?
You're my proxy for this, okay? You're
I
my
can't be,
proxy.
I can't be a proxy for this one. But we can have an abstention. And so I will vote in favor. So with that, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor, 1 abstention. Vote passes. Meeting is adjourned at 8:25. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who have taking the time to spend with us this evening. Much appreciated. And hopefully that you are feeling a little bit more empowered and educated as to what our zoning is going to look like. So thank you, everyone. Much appreciated. We'll see you next week.
Good night. See you.